All right, welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. And of course, we continue with this conversation as we talk about the university funding headache. We were actually cracking our heads over how to get this right, even during the break. And of course, I have just been having a conversation with three gentlemen. And before we took the break, we had gotten to a point, gentlemen, where we had discussed even the need for coming up with a sustainable funding system that would actually keep itself going for years to be able to help learners, be able to access education. And the question I remember asking before we went to the break, Monari, just to pick up on that, the biggest challenge that even HELB has been cracking its head over is the repayment strategy. The ability of, let me call them comrades, coming back and as loyal Kenyans and saying, you guys helped me, I got a loan, I went to school, I studied, now I have a job, this is your money, take it back so that it can benefit somebody else. How we wish that was the case. But we have thousands of young people, hundreds and millions, if not to say that, who still do not have jobs, despite the fact that they have a quality. So when we say sustainable, how sustainable is sustainable?
Sustainability means that you can be able to pay back what you got so that the future students can be able to benefit from that scheme. And this sustainability is to ensure that the current students who are benefiting from the previous students can be able to be guaranteed some funding for their learning. It is not 100% sustainable because of the reasons you have given. There is unemployment, there are students who keep on studying. Those are the challenges that are there. However, when you reduce the current government's burden by 40% from by the others paying, it means that the budgetary allocation to that vote is reduced and you are able to fund more students, because that is a math that you now look at. If the 40% were not paying, it means we would have to dig deeper into our pockets to be able to pay for more students. And it's encouraged that this is the best mode of funding the future, because again, if people don't pay, what will happen? But lastly, as I leave that point, let's not look at it fully that you must be able to get a job. We have very many young people, and young people nowadays are very enterprising, who are out here doing and hustling every day, and they are able to get an income. Kenya and the government is growing its base so that Kenyans can be able to pay. And that's why we are saying we are deferring the payment, going back to the current funding model, because we know the current economic situation in Kenya, households may not be able to afford. So therefore, why not give students a loan when they leave and they get an income which may not be employment-based? They can be able to support the generation that will be in the university then. Yes. There's
an aspect of lessening the burden on the government side that came out strongly from your argument. Prof, just if you're to pick that up.
Yes.
How significant is that? Because looks like we are not looking at
Madam, it is true. You know, when I went to university, in our class of education science, I'm a teacher, we were only 200 in Kenyatta University, the whole country. Today, people doing educations are thousands and thousands. And they all want to get support, which should be the case from our government. The gig is that my friend Ngetich is doing, geospatial engineering. Again, when we started in Jomo Kenyatta, I think we started with less than 30 people. Today, I think Jomo Kenyatta, they could be over 80. Nairobi has it, everybody has it. They all want money from the same place. And therefore, you really have to find a way in which you can meet all these things. And that's why I think this new funding model is trying to distribute the payment to the household, the parents, the sponsor, the payment to the government in two ways. Number one, giving the scholarship, which Ngetich as a student will never pay. Number two, also because there's still part of that money that is still remaining, giving loan. And this loan is eventually to be paid. I am a teacher. We don't learn to get jobs. We don't learn to do business, but we learn to have our brain opened so that eventually we can be entrepreneurial, we can create jobs, we can create business, or we can join the employment places where people go. So this is what I would like to encourage us as Kenyans, that education that we want to give and we are continuing to give is that prepares them not only for working here in Kenya, but also working outside there, but also joining the community to the world of work and helping our responsible government to create more jobs, to create more business. And that requires a proper education.
Monari, this widening of the net to reach as many people as possible with education, higher education, does it come with a cost? Could we be biting more than we can chew?
No, I don't think we can bite more than we chew, because that is the way the world is going. The population is growing. We cannot avoid it. In fact, when you look at the number of students who are transitioning to university in Kenya, we still have very low numbers. We are talking about 21% of the students who access university or who get C+ and above in our country. When you look at countries like Japan, where we are talking about 60 to 70%. Europe, we are talking about 80% of the students are able to transition to university. Then as Kenya, we are still way behind. It is important as a country to not look at this as an issue of the current situation. We need to broaden our mind and look at it as an issue which will be able to propel our country to greater heights, because of the required human capital that is required by the world will be availed by our own Kenya.
All right, thank you, Monari. And allow me now, bring in our fourth panelist, that is FCPA Charles Ringara, the CEO of the Higher Education Loans Board. Asante sana for making time for this conversation. We just began scratching the surface, and I tell you, we've gone even deeper than what I had anticipated in just a few minutes. Yeah,
Thank you,
all courtesy.
Thank you,
Anyway, but karibu sana. We're just trying to understand this new funding model. It's now called the student-centered funding model. We started by just looking at whether the goal that, this model was targeting is being met, even with regards to how it's being implemented. But before we get to also your thoughts on the same, I just want you to break down for us the significance of this transition and the gaps in, funding higher education that we have experienced as a country, that now with this new dawn, this funding model seeks to really fill.
Thank you, Safin, and my apologies for coming a bit late, but just to indicate where we have come from, and I think the panel might have already talked about the DUC, which was a historical perspective that we came from, and you have seen the challenges that institutions of higher learning have had in regard to funding, with the current pending bills, running almost, above 70 billion shillings. Now, the student-centered model came in to be able to cure those challenges that we have had in funding. And because the student is the one that pays school fees or tuition fees, so that universities and institutions of higher learning can be able to deliver the service they deliver, then it was important to equip the student with enough resources so that they can be able to pursue higher education. And therefore, when you look at the whole spectrum of what we are looking at in regard to need assessment of where you are coming from, so that you can then be able to be enabled by government to be able to pay the full, complete tuition fees that is required by the institutions of higher learning, that is the essence of this model, so that then you don't have institutions of higher learning having to pay half salaries, a quarter salaries, or not being able to settle, statutory obligations, as it were.
Yeah.
And therefore, one of the big things the government is pushing in this line is to make sure, first of all, that institutions of higher learning, they have enough cash flows to be able to run the institutions, to be able to offer quality education. And therefore, the thing is, where is the child coming from? Where is the student coming from? The background. Previously, when you look at the grants that were there, or what is now being called scholarships, they were not on need basis. But the loans at least were on need basis. But then still not sufficient enough to be able to cover exactly what the institutions of higher learning required. And therefore, when you look at the current funding model, is looking at where are you coming from, how much can you be able to afford as a household, given many other parameters. And maybe the panelists have already talked about the social components that we look at, where you are coming.
We are glad we haven't yet, and that's why we are glad to have you.
So we look at the social
before you even continue, just breaking down for us how that is going to work. There's something you mentioned about the element of pending bills and the burden that the universities have been facing. We were struggling here to get a justification on why this funding model should be called student-centric, putting in mind the things that you've just mentioned. Is it to benefit the university? Where is the student coming in here? How is the student a priority? That was a concern, I believe, that was raised by Ngetich when we were starting this conversation. For him, he feels this is not student-centric. It's a strategy to help the universities deal with the financial struggles that the universities have been dealing with. What's your thought, Lingera?
Now, it will be myopic not to look at what the university requires to give you quality education. So when you look at when the university says, I'm offering a service, my service is priced at 100,000. And then government says, or the student or household says, we will pay you that 100,000. But government, because of many other inabilities, is not able to pay the 100,000. What happens to the quality education that you get? It will have to go down. If you pay a lecturer at 50% or 25%, if you pay a lecturer 50%, he will give you half-baked graduate because he doesn't have enough time to be in class with you so that he can be able to deliver quality education. Remember, at the end of the day, what we are looking at higher education is deliver quality education to be able to deliver services to Mwananchi in this country. If you deliver half, then the lecturer will give you half, and that is a component we need to sort out. And so let the learners not feel like it is the universities that are being sorted out. The universities are offering a quality service at a certain price.
So the student-centric comes in terms of quality. That's what I'm getting, the quality, not the ability.
Quality and access. Remember, university is about quality and access.
So does it mean that in the previous cohorts, the ones who've been working without this university funding model are half-baked graduates?
I didn't say that. Professor Romana is here. He shouldn't be able to clarify whether they are offering
because we need clarity on...
I think, Madam, we produce some of the best graduates in this country. I've taught for the last 32 years in the university. Some of my students go to the best universities in this world and they are always top. But we are saying that the challenge, the financial challenges that the universities has had as a result of the government not able to deliver the 80% and now only able to deliver about 48 to 50%. Those challenges will eventually translate to Ngetich coming out as a geospatial engineer, which is not proper. And we are saying that should not be. What this model is trying to address is now how to make sure that we get the 100% payment so that we give quality service for Ngetich so that when he comes out, he can get jobs, he can create jobs, he can go anywhere in the part of the world and get a job. And I think that is what
if I can weigh in further, in terms, you asked them to say about the sustainability of this model and how the students have a perspective of it. Let me give the voice of the comrades. It's not sustainable based on the fact that at the end of my tenure or my study in school, I'll be having a very big load to repay. Then number two, they are funding based on the students and admission to a university. The cost of carrying out a course, for example, medicine in KU is 612. In University of Nairobi, less by around 20 or 30,000. In Egerton by 50 or something. So what if now students decide and say, let us go to the cheap university, that is Egerton, and no one comes to University of Nairobi? Does it mean we'll have to shut down University of Nairobi because there'll be no finances from the government being pumped into the institution? So how are we going also to build infrastructure for our universities if it's based on the on the cost of these administering the particular course that the
Good
student is going.
But this issue of universities competing, just allow me. This issue of universities competing, isn't it?
It's healthy. Yes, it is very healthy because what he has actually said.
Money follows students.
Yes, money follows. It means universities will become more competitive. They'll get the best in the market. They'll ensure their graduates, as they come out to the best quality. And Romanas here will tell you that is the situation that you require. If he's looking at a comfort zone where you are funding or you're ensuring people have the money they require and there is no competition, it will not be good for our country. And he should be happy that is the situation. We need to create centers of excellence for certain programs. We all know when we were growing up, if you are going to KU, for example, you are going to be one of the best teachers. in this country. And that is where we need to push.
Right.
We will know that if you are going to University of Meru, you will come out the best scientists.
Science and technology.
Yes.
Can I weigh in?
Yes, you can, please.
Yes. This model, the money is following the students. That we have to agree. Ngetich will decide, me, I'm going to be a geospatial engineer from University of Nairobi. Na kama Nairobi in a charge 100, that's what you are going to pay. If JKUAT is paying 200, that's what somebody is going to pay. But the other thing, because we have just started this, and we have talked with these heads of sagas who are present here, and my fellow vice chancellors, that there's a need of policy governing the fees. I think universities, together with the sagas here, must lay ground on the minimum fees and then the maximum fees. Then the students will now, the universities will now decide this is the fees I'm paying, and the student will have to study this and decide, me, I'm going to study here depending on what I have in my pocket.
All right.
I do not want to lament further. but
I'll give you a chance shortly because I want you to tell us how would you rather this is done.
Exactly.
Yes.
But before that, let me allow CPA to now. You know, we could assume people know the breakdown. We could assume people have a picture of what we are talking about when you're talking about this new dawn in funding universities. But just to paint a picture for us, because one key issue that is of concern for me is the means of testing need. That breakdown of that is going to sort of like put students in 5 different categories based on their level of need. How do we arrive at that? Just give us a justifiable reason on how best this has been done to ensure there are no gray areas, there are no concerns, and there are no cases we used to hear a long time ago where beneficiaries of the so-called help were people coming from very well-off families, yet the people who really need this money are the ones who don't get it at the end of the day.
Before I come to the MTI, Safin, let me just address a question that a teacher is trying to say about fee structure across public universities. And Romanas has tackled it very well. One of the efforts, we have now 1 year, we have run 1 year on this program. Yeah. We might have disparity in terms of school fees charged across universities. Professor Romanas will tell you, because he sits in the Vice Chancellor's Committee, the effort has now this year been to standardize. Across board. So whether you are doing computer science in Maseno or you are doing in Meru, it does not matter where you are. So there is an effort to standardize. You might see a differential of 1,000, 2,000 shillings here and there, and that is what is being eliminated. And of course, don't ask me about private universities, because that's a different whole game. And therefore, that should eliminate this aspect that he is talking about. Do you mean that the guy who came out of Egerton, which is cheaper than University of Nairobi, is actually being demystified? And therefore, everybody who goes to any of these schools, any of these colleges, or any of these universities has then a standard school fees that they are able to charge. Let me weigh in on the means testing instrument. The only acclaimed factor to know your background is the means testing instrument. In regard to, we might come from the same village, but then my family is well enabled more than your family. How do you know that? One of the ways to know that is to look at the socioeconomic factors that actually affect that family. For example, you might have a certain amount of income, but it is shared across 10 children. You might have the same income, but it is shared against 1 child. So that is what is called weighting. So we look at the weighting of that income, and remember, we have got all these indicators that are showing us that level of income, where you come from, which school did you go to, both primary and the secondary school. When you look at your Kenya revenue data, we can be able to see where you are, in which band are you in terms of income. When you look at your NHIF or SHIF now today, we know how much you are paying, and that will give us an indication of where you fall. We also look at the area that you are coming from, and we look at it from a small area, poverty identification, which is called the PPI. Let me give you an example. Kiambu is one of the richest counties. But today, if you look at the PPI, the level of poverty index in Mangu, which is within Kiambu, and the one in Deia, which is still within Kiambu, is different. So that factor, again, is factored in terms of determining where you are coming from. We also look at how many siblings do you have in higher education, what gender, which gender do you come from? Are you from a single parent or an orphan? And those will be claimed to be affirmative action that we actually, give the entire. What is a family structure? And the family structure is given very well by virtue of the ID number of your parent and your guarantors. Once you give us that ID number, we can actually see your family tree. What is the level of education in that family? Again, that gives you a number that we are able to give you. Remember, we will tell you to declare your household income, but we will not rely necessarily of what you have declared. Because we will go and validate that information elsewhere.
But as you go on, I have very many questions just running through my mind. For example, the school you came from. Are you aware that in this country there are people who may have come from very good schools, but courtesy of some goodwill, somebody who held their hand somewhere. It was a private school, very good school, but a sponsorship that they got. The area you come from could be termed as a place that is very poor based on the poverty index. But does it mean that everybody living in that area is poor? You know, how accurate is that poverty index?
No.
And of course, also looking at other issues like, for instance, the level of education of the parents. Do you know there are people who have not gone to school, but they are earning so much based on the businesses that they are running? It could be somebody just having a stall somewhere selling fruits, but they are making a lot of money, more than even somebody who is salaried and went to school. How accurate is this instrument?
Excellent conversation, Safin. Now, when you look at the PPI, you might come from an area that is very poor. But then when I go to your income levels as determined by KRA banding, then you actually discount all that. That the social indicators are discounted by the income that actually that family is making. You might come from a village that is actually very poor. But then when you look at the social status of where you are coming from, then that is discounted by the income. So we'll do the social classification first of all, and we'll give you a number. And then when you look at your income, it changes all the parameters. Income has two main sources, one from KRA and another one from NHIF. That will give us an indication of where you are. We may not fall far away from where the tree is because of the various, because it's a composite score we are looking at about 9 spectrums. What is a composite score you get? Now, you might be in a very expensive school, like, for example, Molo Academy, but you are sponsored in Molo Academy. What you are supposed to do when you are applying, we ask for evidence that you are actually sponsored, including where people held RMBs. You know, there are people who hold RMBs so that they can take that kid to
school.
Riara.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But you know, you will ask yourself, which is this community which held an RMB so that they can take their child to Riara High School.
But
if they did, please provide the evidence, and that will tell us in terms of the number that will come up with the MTI.
I'll come back to you to tell me about the underage students, because the biggest issue has been those who are locked out because they were below 18, they could not have the IDs. How is that going to be addressed? But Ngetich, I wanted to weigh in on his breakdown, and you were very concerned about this new funding model, and I'm really curious to also know, how would you rather this is addressed? And the areas you've touched on, do you feel this is actually going to zero into the need of the learners and address those needs when it comes to access to higher education?
Right from the roots of this tree that it's being trying to be watered to grow, we have a problem. on sustainability.
What is that problem from your diagnosis?
It is, we're saying, we're shifting the burden, or we're redistributing from the government to the student and the parents in terms of the loan and in terms of help. So that is where the first problem is. Then number two is, I tend now to feel we've inclined this ladder on the wrong wall, and we're just trying to scale it so fast instead of trying to ask ourselves, is this the right wall we are supposed to be scaling? Because our vice chancellors have been entrusted with little, but they haven't even been able to manage this well. Let me give you an example. In the University of Nairobi, we've been paying 1,000 shillings for student ID card. We haven't received it from 2021. We've been paying 2,000 Kenya shillings for students' activity fee, for fuel for our buses, for games, for events. Yet, as we talk, if you got their request for a bus, you're not given the bus. You told
so the issue is not money?
You told there is no fuel. Yet these are prepaid service in the university. We pay 42,000 for accommodation, yet at the same scenario, the state of the hostels are in deplorable state. Yet the money is being paid for people to be there. The other thing is, they now go to a further extent of advertising private hostels instead of developing what we have in the university, or buying into what the government has said. Let us do private and public-private partnerships to build infrastructure. Are we scaling the wrong wall? Yes. Have we looked at how the resources in the universities are mismanaged? We haven't. And because those are murky waters, and Prof is here, and perhaps they are associates in all these, we don't want to talk about that. Have we done, just a minute, have we done audits or look at audit reports and seen the payments that were done erroneously in our universities before now we come back and burden students further? What confidence are you giving me and the populace of students who are watching that when they pay this amount of money and they have a loan on their neck, they will receive the services if by now they are not receiving?
All right.
It is blatant lying to ourselves.
Prof.
So are we using our students to solve the debt crisis that universities are having?
Right.
Yes. And we need to rethink all this. And they are trying to convince us after we've raised uproar. If it takes you more than time to explain for people to understand, I'm in the University of Nairobi because I'm bright and many others are bright. It can't take us an eternity to understand and say, okay, we buy into it. Are you trying to say all students are fools?
Especially the ones from the University of Nairobi. Prof, unfortunately, you will have to speak on this because this issue of public, the mismanagement.
Accountability,
It is a public crisis. It's no longer, it's not something that we can shy away from or even hide our heads in the sand over. It's an issue. So it's the money. Is the issue the money, or is the issue the...
Madam, I think it is misinformation. All public universities are public institutions. That means the governance structure when it comes to financial management are the same throughout. We have internal audit, which really manages the controls, the risk and all the rest. And we also have external audit, which come every year. So I would like to assure my friend Michael Hiangetich that there is no mismanagement. Most of the universities, when it comes...
There's no management of funds in universities?
No, there's none. There's none. They would be in the newspaper like this today.
But they have been. There is a vice chancellor of the university.
No, let me just finish. I don't want to discuss my colleague, but let me just finish. When it comes to activities fees in most universities are controlled by the student. Like in my place, it is SAMU, the Student Association of Meru University, together with the Dean of Students and the Sport Director. When it comes to most of these things, the accommodation fee is an income to the university which eventually goes to do some of the activities like buying the reagents for your geospatial engineering practical.
Accommodation fee to reagents?
I mean, it is an income to the university. Part of it is used to maintain the houses, but part of it also goes as a source
so I pay accommodation to buy reagents instead of improving my hostels?
Listen, my brother, part of it goes to manage the hostels and pay the workers. But what remains can also be used to support the activities in the university. And we have just discussed here that the universities, instead of getting 80, have been getting what? 48. Where do you think they'll get that gap to pay the salaries and all that? So once we have done the maintenance of the hostels, we have done all this, we have gone for game. What remains? That is what sometimes we use even to pay all these things. But we mean well. There are no vice chancellors that are actually mismanaging the university funding. In fact, vice chancellors are stressed. Nobody today in Kenya wants to be a vice chancellor of public university because of this funding institution. And that's why we are very happy with the government, especially right now, that we are trying to confront this elephant face on, so that eventually the next 3 or 4 years will come out of the problem we have.
FCPA, I'm trying to look at whether, as you sit down on the tables where these decisions are made and looking at the funding crisis at the university, there is that element of a 360 discussion on where really the problem could be, because you're hearing the issues that are being raised here. And we cannot say that, you know, the management of funds in universities is not a problem. It has been a problem. It's been on the public domain. There are audit reports that have actually proven that this is a big crisis in public universities across the country. So do we look at where really the problem is, or are we linear in terms of how we are solving this particular crisis?
And Safin, for sure, the government has to look deep and introspect what is the problem of the current pending bills that we're having. And one of the key things that we looked at is that if an item is going for X amount of money and you produce 50% of that, then definitely there are bound to be problems. I will not speak, and Professor Roman has spoken about financial governance in terms of the universities. You know, everybody has to do his part. As funding agencies, one of the key things that we looked at, and maybe Geoffrey has already talked about this from a UFB perspective, is this 80% that was promised by government that has been declining. In fact, he might have said that the best we ever achieved was around 2018 when we did 66%. 66%. Out of the expected 80%. Now, remember, even this DUC thing was a compromised figure. It was not the actual market price of actually delivering that cost. But even on that compromised figure, you are not able to pay the entire 80%. We ended up coming as low as 42%. And because of that, the pending bills of universities was the number that we talked about, maybe above 70 billion. But and government actually paid the 80%. The amount of money that universities are owed by government then would be about, Geoffrey, do you say 167 billion?
137 billion.
137 billion.
Yeah.
If they were able to pay the 80%, that tells you something. The problem is not meeting what you are promised to meet. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the best way that actually government can come up with is fund the student goes to pay the actual school fees. And that is what has happened. If you look at the private universities, when you go to the door of the private university, it tells you, I am charging this program 100,000. You have to pay that 100,000 somehow. And that is why you find then private universities are able to meet all their costs. And that is a diagnosis that was done so that we can come up with this new funding model so that universities are well capitalized and they have enough cash flows to be able to run the universities. As to how now the universities are using the money, that's a different story that you can actually ask the vice chancellors of the public universities, how is that money then being used? But you should also ask them.
Are you concerned as a funding agency that let's keep pumping more funds, but aren't you concerned about where this money goes? It is as equally a problem as it is to the public university, because you can't keep on pumping funds, yet these funds are being misappropriated.
For sure it's a concern. But that's why I'm saying Jesus Christ will save the world. Everybody else will have to do his bit. And that's why we are saying, let us fund the students sufficiently well to go and pay the school fees. Now, when the school fees reaches the school, then let the school know how to prudently use those resources so that they can be able to offer quality education 100%, not any other way. And the Auditor General, remember, is actually to check out how are you using these resources. And that's why I'm saying there is division of our work that we do. We will do the funding sufficiently well, and let the Auditor General then say, Professor Omara Zodhiambo is not, using the resources he has been given sufficiently well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And Madam,
but Monari, let me, Monari, this isolation of responsibility, and let me also add isolation of blame, can it work?
It's a hot potato.
Yeah, can it work, this strategy?
No, but no one has isolated blame. I think we are working together with the universities to institute even other reforms.
Yeah.
We are looking at other reforms, for example, encouraging IJAs, that is income generating activities. Universities are very clear at this, so that they can be able to supplement the fees that they are charging. If you look at the fees that they are charging, this was fees that was agreed in 2015-2016. Definitely these fees has been able to increase. So looking at the IJAs, that is one of the reforms. We are looking at commercialization of research. We want universities to move from just doing research to commercializing and working with industry. The other one we are looking at is solarization, so that they can be able to reduce their costs. We want universities to ensure that one of the key elements in their costs is electricity. How can they be able to solarize their campuses so that costs can be reduced? So we are not only looking at the issue of fees so that universities can remain sustainable. We are looking at the environment at the university and instituting various reforms so that the universities can be able to remain sustainable and offer, most importantly, quality education.
Mm-hmm. Do those reforms stir hope in you as a comrade?
This is the things that they've been singing since eternity. Right from the start, when professors and the vice chancellors entered to office, we are going to innovate and commercialize. We are going to use our property in the university to ensure we generate income. We are going to do this. Nothing has been done. And Professor the VC is saying that even people are shying away from becoming, there is no mismanagement of funds. I will first say, from the Auditor General's report of University of Nairobi, year ended 30th June 2022, areas of my concern is told accommodation hostels in Loakabete campus, which were never completed, and the contractor was paid 70 million for that case, and the hostels are not functional to date. The other thing is an overpayment of an non-working borehole in Kikuyu campus, which pumped water for only 20 minutes, then stopped. After doing further inquiry, it was realized that there is no sufficient water to pump. The other thing is, which is of concern to students, is unsupported procurement methods that the university did to a certain company called Health Tech Partners. So what is Prof trying to tell us? We have the reports from the Auditor General. Then the other thing that he's saying, that the VCs are shying away from this job. The Vice Chancellor of the University of Nairobi, despite the employer, that is the council, telling him, hey man, you need to go on terminal leave for us to assess your work. He wants to hold on to office. What is in these vice chancellors' offices and the CEOs of our universities that wants to be protected so much? And once we have that discussion, we are going to solve this cash crisis and the debt that we have in the public universities, instead of pardoning people who can't afford.
All right.
For heaven's sake.
I asked you a question earlier, Ngetich. How would you rather this transition takes place? Because it's one thing to raise concerns about what is already being implemented, but it's another for you to also tell us, how do you rather, when we're talking about a student-centered model of funding, from your perspective, just to address the concerns that you have raised, how do you rather it's done?
First, let us all come to the table with clean hands and say, we have a problem, and agree that there is a problem. The cost of living, as Monari has said, has increased. And say the universities are in a debt crisis, and we must come together collectively to respond to this, not hoodwinking us with the fact that, hey, this is a student-centered thing and it's leaving me with so much burdens. Then we are calling for are the people who we've given them these responsibilities to become managers, are they having the capacity to generate income the way he's saying? Or is it something that will come and say on national TV, and in a period of 5 years, you have completely nothing for a track record to prove, yet you are still fighting for another term to sink our universities in debt? For example, in University of Nairobi, we are a student body, we have 42,000 students.
Well, I was actually hoping you'd continue with that list, because you're giving us very valid points on what...
Look, we are having 42,000 students. To mean, if each student pays 1,000 shillings for the student's body, we have 42 million. But the university approves for us a budget between 30 and 39. This is the maximum for this year that they have approved. Where does this 2 million or 3 million go? Where does the others, because you don't use the budget conclusively, where does it go? Right. And whenever we raise these queries to the even internal auditors, can you give us the reports of UNSA budget so that it can inform us to make the next budgets?
Which is a given.
We not given.
Which is a given. We agree there is a problem, and you have actually very rightfully put
exactly
it across.
But
my question is, so how do we move?
Can Ringera here stop saying that it falls under the AG or under the Attorney General, not Attorney General, but the Auditor General's office? We all have come to the table together and ask ourselves, look at one another in the eye and say, what I gave you, I have heard there is a complaint here. The Auditor General report is saying this. But if we throw the ball to the other court, the Auditor General will say, I presented it to Parliament.
Well said, Ngetich. Prof, I'm coming back to you, but let me allow also Ringera to weigh in, because we are also trying to understand this model even as we go. Quick questions for you, 3 key ones. The key requirements for one to be eligible. There was one concern about an underage applicant. This has been a crisis over the years for help. So if you don't have an ID, what do you do? Especially just recently when we had the cases of students not being able to access their IDs, those who have applied, what happens? And of course also, the other question touches on the issue of, I'll run that question by you. I think I've lost it somewhere, but you can begin to respond to what are the requirements for one to be eligible, and the underage, below 18. The question that I wanted to ask you was touching on what happens to the other courts of KCSE. Do they get into this new dispensation, or what happens?
Great. Let me first of all raise myself to the issue of underage. And I will come from the law of contract. The law of contract says that you cannot contract with a minor. But then the issue of public interest then comes in. And that is why on 28th of September 2023, Cabinet did an intervention and allowed or instructed the Higher Education Loans Board or the funding agencies to be able to facilitate the minors. Remember, it is the minors. Who is a minor? Anybody below 18. The minors to be able to apply successfully for funding, whether it is a loan or whether it is a scholarship. And that was facilitated from last year. Now, moving forward, we then discovered there are people who are above age of majority, that is 18 plus, but they don't have an ID for many reasons, and obvious reasons. Maybe delays from NRB, Register of Persons, or maybe somebody has not taken interest in terms of trying to get an ID, or many other reasons could actually be there. And therefore, we did a facility for them to apply using index numbers. So what you require is an index number, and you also attach a DOB, birth certificate, so that you can be able to establish your DOB or date of birth. Although we already have that information through NEMIS, we've achieved the DOB through NEMIS. That tells us that you actually have age of majority, which means you can actually be able to contract, but you don't have the identification document. The identification document could be on the way, either using a waiting card, or it may not even be there. And that is where the list then comes, so that we can be able to whitelist you from that aspect of you are of age of majority, but you have not been able to get the identification card. So in summary, what you require, if you don't have an ID, is your KCSE index number. Remember, we'll be able to verify that KCSE index number with the validities I have. 2 key ones is NEMIS and also KCSE, placement service that has already offered you a place to go to the university. So those are the only documents that you require so that you can be able to successfully apply. And I can confirm, today my meter or the counter is reading 82,000 applications are already in for universities.
All right.
Out of those 82,000 applications, we have over about 30,000 who don't have IDs or who have used actually the index number. Is the system working? Yes, it is working.
So it's,
by
up,
virtue of that
it's
number.
up from the initial 74 that had applied. It's gone
Actually,
up to 82.
it was 78. I don't know where the 74 came from.
It's gone
when
to
I was here in studio on Monday evening, the PS announced 78. But then she said we have 74 who have not applied. How do you get 74? Because 153,000 were placed.
Yes.
So we were at 78. So she was saying 74 have not applied. And today I'm confirming we are now at about 82,000 as at last evening. Now, you also have asked another question in regard to document. I've already seen the document that you require. And then you asked, who is affected by this model? For universities, anybody who did KCSE after KCSE 2022, those are the ones who are covered. But remember, TVET is unique. TVET goes back all the way to even 2014. So TVET is allowed even to go back to be able to be affected, as long as it is now that you are joining university.
I still have questions for you, but let me also just allow Prof. There was a burning issue. And sorry to have cut you short there.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to assure Kenyans that this model is called student-centered because the student is the king. That means you can go to University of Nairobi, as my friend Michael here said, and if he is not satisfied, he can decide to move to Meru. And pesa ya Ringera na Munari itafuata yeye. The student is the king. Secondly, the challenges are there, and I really appeal to all Kenyans. It's not because of the mismanagement, it's because of what we have explained. The universities all over the country are trying. That's why we have strengthened our RISE Directorate. That is Research, Innovations, Commercialization and Extension Directorate. If you go to University of Nairobi, I'm sorry, I'm not a vice chancellor there, but we share this thing. They collect a lot of money from research. And when you bring 100, maybe 10 or 15% come to the basket. So we are trying as universities, Vice Chancellor, to create ways, sustainable ways of eventually overcoming these challenges beside the student-centered model. We mean well, and I think we pray for the support from our students, from our country, and from everybody. After maybe 3 or 4 years, we'll come out of this problem. Thank you.
All right. Monari, among the factors that influence the choice of a course for students, for some would be the cost of the program. There is the issue of employability, like is it marketable? We've always had that question, is it marketable? There is also the influence of mentors who tell you this course is good, do this, do that. But what stands out for me is the cost implication. What are the chances that we could be having a huge population of young people being blocked out of their dream courses because of the cost that is so high for them not to be able to afford? What impact does this have for us as a country? And is this new funding model factoring in that challenge that will make the young people be able to do the courses that they would wish, cost irregardless?
I really appreciate that question, because when you look at the cost of the program vis-a-vis the opportunities, that is where the challenge is. And one of the biggest challenges is that there have been a lot of misinformation that the cost will be a hindrance to the student to be able to achieve their dreams. And we want to be practical here, except for the programs that teachers given here in terms of their course, that is medicine, which charges 612, that is the highest in Kenyatta University. Let's have a look at the actual cost of where most of our students are. And you indicated that people choose their program based on the cost of the program. And we have not been fair to Kenyans, because it should not be an hindrance. I'll give you an example. If a student is pursuing, these are the most popular courses, education arts, the cost is 183,600. If you are placed in band 1, the government is giving you a scholarship of 128,520. You will get a loan of 45,900, which is even less if you are the highest then the cost in DUC. Then you get an upkeep. This is money that you'll use for your day-to-day of 60,000. And then this student will be required to only pay an amount of 9,180. Safin, how is that a hindrance? Because if you get 60,000, in the worst case scenario, if your parents don't even have any money, they are the poorest in the country, you can use the 60,000 to pay the 9,000 that you expected to pay at the university. And that's why I'm saying this program this model is not a hindrance. In fact, it's an enabler. If you go to commerce, BA, Bachelor of BCom, the cost is 220, and this is on average. The government will give you 154,105. Tuition loan, which you'll get from HELB, will be 55,000, and then you get an upkeep of 60,000. And then the household will pay only 11,000. Surely. My humble request, let's not have misinformation in the country that it is not reachable.
Right.
These are practical figures, and that is what, everyone has been talking about medicine. We have only 623 students who were placed in medicine in the whole country, out of 153,000 students. We cannot dwell on relying on only medicine. We are discouraging many Kenyans from going to university because of relying on medicine, which is at 612. And we are saying, if there is a problem in this medicine, we are looking at the MTI, we are looking at how can we support this, and we are not saying that...
So the cost of the program is a factor that is considered under the MTI?
Right.
That's a factor?
That's
right.
Yes.
Yes.
So let's be open, and I'm happy Safini brought this discussion. Let us be open and say, you can access education, it is affordable, the loan that you're getting, and I'm happy that teachers brought it up, that is a deferred payment. When you are now working as a teacher, you can be able to read it. Thank you.
Okay, let me weigh in a little bit on that.
And I also want Kenyans to weigh in. Sorry.
Okay, you'll find that let us leave alone medicine and everything else. So most of us will fall under the middle income and the modest income category, whereby we'll be paying 40% and at least 50%. And currently, we've been talking about that the government has been paying to a tune of 48%, not even to the mark that they are proposing. How confident are we that the same government will not say now we don't have money and pay that 8% lower than what they promise? If they fail to fulfill the 80%, how certain are we that these are 50% scholarship they'll be able to abide by? And then they will come again tell us we have a problem with the funding of the university.
Gera, a quick response to that. And now there's also austerity measures that have sort of slashed the budget of the Higher Education Loans Board slightly. Is that going to affect you? His question is, how confident are we that the government will not come and say we don't have money?
2 weeks ago, we engaged the Parliamentary Education Committee in terms of budget for this year. I think we need to, first of all, say kudos to government. Last year, we put in new money that was actually put in the sector on higher education, both in TVET and also universities, was to the tune of about 45 billion. New money. That money was not available in the former budget. This year, we are looking to upwards of 26 billion being injected into this sector. And those are the conversations we're having with the Education Committee. One of the key things that both Education Committee and Budget Committee have committed to this country is the student money must be ring-fenced to the extent that they can be able to support the student up to where they are supposed to be supported. And therefore, the discussion this year is, for example, to cover that budget gap. I don't know where Ngetich you are coming from in regard to getting concerns of whether government will be able to afford. Government has said, let me finish. Government has said our commitment is to see this model work so that we can support our institutions of higher learning to offer quality education. I think in a number of situations, the president has been very candid on that and saying that we will support it to the extent that they require.
So government will...
Today, if you look at the priorities of government in terms of the plan for this year, the first item is actually funding of universities and TVET. And I would challenge you, go and look at the current budget. The top item there is supporting the student in the universities and also in the TVET. So which means government is conscious about this. I don't think there is a chance to backtrack on that promise they've given the government.
I hope we will call you back and hold you to account. This very commitment that you have made to us today, being the 7th day of August 2024. Let me read some of the views from our viewers this morning. We'll do it after this. Okay. Yeah. Let me just also allow Kenyans to have their say. Wamengoja sana. So we put that up, talking about the university funding headache, and this is what we have been discussing this particular morning. This is what you're saying online. So, Nixon Dugire, you are saying, with corruption still taking shots from the center stage, university funding headache will never heal. For instance, with this new funding model, which tends to favor the most needy, you'll find almost every student being very needy. All right. Okelo Mwalimu, as a way of redistributing wealth, the government should amend the new university funding model with an aim of either providing grants and lowering HELB interest rates to students from poor backgrounds while raising interest rates to those from well-to-do backgrounds. We have one, Olum Justice, the government should pay 100% university fees for all students and give loans for upkeep to the vulnerable. On clearance from HELB, Ngetich should understand that it's a compliance certificate needed by employers. All right. Brian Keep _ Kenya, the new funding model in our universities is like the Finance Bill 2024. Even the public universities don't understand it. We need serious civic education to our parents and the students on it. We have, again, Brian, that was, again, saying on how likening this to the Finance Bill 2024. That's Brian Keep Kenya. I think I've gone through that. Let's get the next one. All right, so yeah, so that is what Kenyans are saying online. Unfortunately, I'm really pressed for time for this conversation. I may not have the luxury to allow you have your final words. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate how incisive this discussion has been. I hope it's a conversation we should be picking up in the near future, just looking at the steps, the progress we are making with regards to making this dream of making education accessible to Kenyans a reality. I've been hosting Professor Romano Sudhiambo, the Vice Chancellor, Meru University of Science and Technology. I've also been having this conversation with Geoffrey Monari, CEO, Universities Fund, and also representing the voice of the students, Ngetich Michael Soy, Head of Public Service at UNSA, and FCPA Charles Ringara, CEO, Help. Asanteni, gentlemen, for this time. I'll be taking a short break, coming back with the health segment as we talk about Mpox, the monkeypox, understanding the basics, especially in the wake of us as a country having reported our first case. What is it that we need to do in terms of precautionary measures? And of course, also coming after the Ministry of Health has announced that they have escalated surveillance. I'll be hosting an expert in matters infectious diseases who will be helping me unpack that for you to know how you can take better responsibility of your own safety. For now, we take a break.